Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I'm here in partially opened Boulder Creek, California. I'm excited today to have this guy back on. He's definitely an audience favorite of Slow News Days, and just an all around fascinating human being. So let's jump right the hell into it. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, let's please welcome back to the show the one and only Jared Beck. How you doing there, man? How's things?
I'm trying to hang in there. It's good to be here, Steve. Always fun to be on your show. Always a good conversation. So I'm looking forward to us trying to hash things out. Right.
Yeah, it's a crazy fucking world we're living in right now. We kicked off the year 2020 by almost getting into World War III. And then after that, it was there was something stupid before something else stupid before the lockdown. And now we're trying to give unmitigated power to Bill Gates and Eric Schmidt as a result of this coronavirus. And then the George Floyd protests are going 4 days, 5 days strong, with shit being set on fire and more agent provocateurs than you can fit into a 1980s spy thriller. And Anonymous is back. Well, not back, but Anonymous stepped forward yesterday for the first time in several years. I woke up this morning to find out that they had hacked the comms of the Chicago Police Department and had been playing Fuck the Police on a loop throughout police band radio all day. Yeah. They dropped all of the documents from Op Death Eaters, which was everything they could find related to Epstein, as well as suppressed Trump lawsuits. And they've said they're going to fulfill their promise from the Ferguson riots and go after the Ferguson PD. So it's been a busy 12 or 14 hours for those guys.
Yeah, and it's just an incredible sequence of events. Just in just this half year. So we're not done with the year yet. So this is just sort of the build up to something even more fierce that's going to happen. And I think that's the real concern. Actually, is we're just in the beginning stages of something that's going to be, history changing and long lasting. And yeah, our lives are never going to go back to the way they were.
And I don't really do predictions on this show. I'm not any kind of a gambler or a prognosticator. But if I was, I would predict that it's going to be a very long, very hot summer for the Predator class. And also for us out here in the peasantry.
Yeah.
I don't know what I mean. What's your whole take on that? We are just getting warmed up. We are just starting to get into it. Do you have any kind of thoughts on how that may pan out?
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to describe it is that we're in the middle of a world war. It's not, the old type of war where you send the troops off to the trenches and you get, reports from the front, and maybe some bombers show up over London or Nagasaki or wherever, and it's highly associated with conventional means of warfare. We're in the modern age of warfare where the whole world is the battleground. There's a million and one ways to infiltrate a society now, especially a society like ours, which really hasn't taken principles of national sovereignty very seriously in the last century. And I think we've exposed ourselves to this type of war. But I think everything we're seeing, including the coronavirus, the George Floyd incident, the reaction to
Okay. Well, that was interesting. That it appears that we've got no love whatsoever on YouTube, but fuck those assholes. We're gonna do this anyway. For the people watching on D Live that are new, welcome. For the people that are watching on Rockfin that are new, welcome. Let's just jump right into it because really, fuck YouTube and yeah. We were talking in that nice little interlude, Jared,
Yeah,
um, about the anonymous drops relating to Princess Di.
right.
And you said that you had explored that rabbit hole a little bit, and I
Yeah,
think we should just go right into that.
yeah. Well, there's actually some great books that have been published on it. I'll get you the link after the show, but they were written by a guy, I believe, down in Australia, who several volumes just going over the inquests that were held into Princess Diana's death in extraordinary detail. And when you finish reading those books, really, there's no other logical conclusion you can have than that. Princess Diana's death was an assassination by at least several um, intelligence agencies working in concert. And the inquest was a cover up, and it looks like the royal family had direct involvement. So, that's not widely known because mainstream media doesn't report the truth, obviously, and they're not going to tell you the true story about Princess Diana. And of course, they try to push the royals down our throats at every turn. But it looks like Anonymous is putting the issue out there again, and it seems that they've published some information which shows that Princess Diana, at least one of the motivations for assassinating her, was her knowledge and putting on the record, or she was about to put on the record, the royal family's involvement with sex trafficking, which everything we know about Prince Andrew and his relationship with Epstein, which has happened since Diana's death, certainly corroborates that. So it's kind of an interesting moment and something that could be very, very destabilizing in England right now, which is already pretty worked up given Corona, and they've got protests today coming out of the George Floyd situation. So it's going to be a pretty volatile situation over there, I would think. Maybe
Well,
some rioting and looting.
and it's one of those things where most of the people that I know from the UK have resigned themselves to the fact that the royals are a bunch of inbred psychopaths,
Yeah,
but they're inbred psychopaths, and people that aren't from the UK shouldn't go after them necessarily, except for when it comes to Prince Andrew, who's not only a clear pedophile and rapist, but also the UK's largest arms dealer. And we found out through Whitney Webb's reporting that Andrew and Jamal Khashoggi's brother, who was the principal arms dealer for Saudi Arabia, had a connection to Donald Trump and Les Wexner. Um, and this is sort of tying together um, basically like the worst possible figures from the 1980s, with Princess Diana at the middle of it, getting murdered as a result of what she saw and what she heard.
right.
Um, it's fucking wild, man. I don't really know how
Well,
else to.
we're looking at the fall of, in some ways, Western civilization as a whole. In some ways, it's the Anglo-American um prime primary position in Western civilization that we've held on to for so long. So a lot of things are coming crashing down at the same time, and part of the crashing down is the destruction of these myths that keep us together and unify us uh, through propaganda that keeps us obedient to whatever state we're obedient to. So Yeah, the royal family. I mean, this is one of the long-standing myths that's kept the United Kingdom together, and I don't know if they're going to be surviving much longer. It seems to me that Prince Harry had some inside information there and got the fuck out of Dodge just in the nick of time. But I don't know if his older brother is going to fare as well. And it's kind of like these CEOs that have been resigning. We've had a slew of resignations recently because they see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, and that's an important connection to make. I think with the really kind of shockingly high number of CEOs that have stepped down over the last really like 8 to 10 months. And is that I guess I got two questions, and the first would be when a harbinger like that occurs, how long before regular people start to feel the ramifications of that? And the second part of that question would be how vital is mythology to controlling the regular citizenry?
Well, those are two really good questions. I would say on the first, uh, it's the regular people that always pay the highest price in war historically, right? I mean, it's the elites that pull the strings and they, organize the agents provocateurs to, prime the pump and kind of serve as a lighter fluid on um, volatile situations. So they kind of manage the course of events. But those events, the price is always borne by the people at the bottom. And I think it's always borne over an extended period of time because war is a very profitable activity for elites. I mean, they like engaging in wars from time to time because they like manufacturing and distributing weapons, and they like taking advantage of distressed properties. And if they have inside knowledge, they can outmaneuver everyone else. So it's not really bad for them. I mean, maybe there are always a few scapegoats. I mean, that's always going to happen in a war situation among the elites. So I'm not saying things are going to end up great for every member of the royal family. I think it's going to get very, very ugly for them. And over here, I mean, we're going to see at some point there's going to be some kind of purge of the political class in this country. There's going to have to be. I mean, that's, I think, a foregone conclusion. The question is when. Is it going to be a wholesale purge? No, not even the Nazis weren't purged after World War II. Many of them went on to very successful and lucrative careers. In fact, a lot of them right here in the United States as part of our space program. And so, but the people at the bottom never get out of it. They're the ones that lose their lives in the conflict. They're the ones that have their livelihoods destroyed. They're the ones that lose their businesses. Their retirement savings go up in smoke. I mean, that's going to go on for a long. I mean, we haven't even reached the start of that. We haven't gotten to the hyperinflation stage yet, which is going to really hurt really bad. The second question you had was how important is myth to maintaining obedience to the state. I mean, historically, I would say it is the glue that keeps people governed. I mean, in the old days, it was the idea that the king had a divine right to the throne. I mean, that's what kept people obedient to this guy as opposed to some other guy. The idea that he was divine. In our day, divinity has kind of dropped out of it, but it's been replaced by, I would say, sort of which is fueled by the mainstream media to turn our politicians, the royal family, into these wonderful celebrities that people are supposed to worship and love and think are fighting for them. So when that myth disappears, it's going to have to be replaced by something else, and it's probably going to be a myth of some kind, but it'll attach in a different way to a different set of people. And through that, I think some kind of political transformation is going to happen. Not necessarily for the good, but usually that's what happens as a result of large-scale wars like we're in.
And it's interesting that you frame it as a world war, and I tend to agree with that, mostly for the fact that the same principle, like governmental bodies and like the asymmetrical style of warfare that the U.S. has been focused on for really about the last 20 or 25 years, with the advent of the drone program, really. But as long as we've got an organization like DARPA that is in charge of, I guess, advanced thinking in terms of how to make it a very lopsided war on the part of the West, no matter who we're fighting, including their own citizens, our own citizens, that there's going to be, man, I mean, it's going to be fucking messy. It really is. Right before this thing cut out, I said we were looking at a long, hot summer, and I don't see how people can try to return to a pre-corona mindset, just in the way that we couldn't return to a pre-9/11 mindset. And the ramifications of living in a post 9/11 society have been, I guess, highlighted or determined by things like completely intrusive surveillance, the almost seamless merger between tech and government, and that's what's so, I guess, both appealing and fascinating to me with the I get reemergence of an organization or a collective like Anonymous. I was talking to a friend last night about all of this, and his personal theory, which I'll get to in a minute, is hampered, I guess, by the fact that this is going to be a truly digital war, a war that is fought almost backstage or behind the scenes in the digital space, but with real human elements as foot soldiers, and I guess the entire command structure of what a normal regular military would be. But he thinks that that this 2016 is the last election that we're going to have for an extended period of time, that either Trump won't step down or that Hillary Clinton will step in and replace Joe Biden at the convention. And we'll look at a sort of epic political battle played out between what Cynthia McKinney calls cowboys and Ziocons.
Well, that's it's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, if you want to look at the domestic political situation, this is what I would suggest. I believe that the U.S. is nearing the end of its oligarchy phase, and that Trump may be the last or the second to last president who represents the rule by oligarchy in this country. And the oligarchy has been very powerful. It dominated the 20th century as the form of government in the U.S. It expanded the U.S. Into a true global empire. It shot the U.S. to the top of Western civilization, which I think is in the process of crumbling or under siege at least. But Plato, who I consider, one of the geniuses of political thought, and I always go back to Plato, and when I'm trying to think about really basic political questions. But according to Plato in the Republic, and I think this is generally true, There's a 5-stage cycle of government that societies keep cycling through, and oligarchy is one of those phases. And after oligarchy comes a phase that Plato calls democracy, but he doesn't mean democracy in sort of the sense that we think of it as sort of a positive, representative type of government. But he really means, when he talks about democracy, he's really talking about mob rule.
Yeah.
Demos being the people. So he's really talking about a rule by mob that follows from oligarchy after oligarchies inevitably crumble, because oligarchies on their own can't subsist forever. There's an inherent instability in oligarchies from the fact that the oligarchs exclude others from enjoying the privileges of governing, and they don't just exclude all of us peons on the ground floor, but they also exclude other very wealthy people and interests from having a say in what the government does, because you can only have a few oligarchs who genuinely control power. So there's always sort of this pressure that's being put on any given oligarchy by other people who want to be oligarchs. And so it causes this sort of unstable form that eventually unravels. And I think we're seeing that right now. I think we're seeing the U.S. oligarchy being bombarded by other interests, both in the U.S. and foreign, that want to have a say in how the U.S. is governed. And I think a lot of that concern from these foreign elements is the Petro Dollar. The world has been paying this enormous tax or toll to the U.S. since the 1970s, that the U.S. charges by virtue of the fact that it requires countries to trade oil in dollars. And of course, since we're the only country that makes dollars, it's like we've converted all the oil fields to dollar fields. Okay. And that causes China, Russia, every other country you can think of to basically pay us this huge tax. And it's one of the it's one of the things, if not the thing, that has kind of kept the U.S. economy afloat, even though we don't really make anything here anymore. We're not really a productive society in the way that China or South Korea have become, manufacturing bases. We don't really make things to sell to the rest of the world. So what are we actually, getting paid for? Well, we're getting paid because we make dollars that people can trade oil in. Okay. And, and we have a system that actually drives up for demand for the dollar just based on this. And how do we maintain that system? Through violence, right? Every time a country says, hey, I don't want to do this petrodollar thing anymore, like Iraq did, Libya did, well, you know what happens to them. They get crushed by our military. All right. Yeah. So, all right. So the world's been looking at this and they're like, you know what? China, Russia, I don't think I like this system. I'm not, the U.S. is just getting richer and richer and richer from the petrodollar. Why can't we have petro rubles and petro yuan? And, so in order to crack the system, you have to destabilize the U.S. is what I'm getting at. And the next stage that's going to happen is this very unstable mob rule stage. And I think we're already starting to see signs of it. We're starting to see how, certain states are a lot different than other states with respect to, the way of life right now. Some places you still got to stay inside and wear a mask. Other places people are outside, drinking beer and having a good old time with their friends, right? So there's this kind of uneven society that's developing that I think is constitutive of mob rule or democracy in the true Platonic sense. We're moving towards that. And just to get back to the issue of the presidential elections that are coming up, I think Trump will probably go down in history as the last president representative of the oligarchy. There may be some puppet type who follows on him, who's like even worse and more ridiculous. And then the whole thing is going to tumble, and you're going to get a whole new basis for legitimacy. Not necessarily, a lot of people are, they're going to see it as a victory, but it's really going to put us into this very dangerous democracy state, which goes on for a while, according to Plato, and then it turns into a tyranny. And then we're really up fucking shit's creek. Okay. So things are going from bad. Actually, oligarchy's not, is a middling form of government for Plato. It just gets worse and worse. And then, so I think that, I would say that's time frame wise, could be 20, 30 years, 40 years of this. I mean, where it's going to be rough. Luckily, things move a little faster in the information age. So maybe we can accelerate through tyranny a little quicker.
And then go head into what, monarchy?
Well, tyranny then it goes back and it becomes a republic, because the people are supposed to get together and say, this tyrant is so fucking awful, because what happens is people get sick of the disorder in the democracy, according to Plato. This is all in the Republic.
Yeah, it's been fuck. I was maybe 19 when I read the Republic. I should pick that up and reread it again.
You should read the Republic every so often, just to because Plato was a true genius when it came to politics. And basically what happened was Plato was living at a time in Greece when there were all these little city states that would constantly go through revolutions, and so he observed a lot of different governments and sort of figured out what sort of typically happens. So he's a very good describe. But to get back to the democracy, so you have this chaos phase, and of course, looting and rioting is a big part of that in any sort of mob rule situation, right? You have lots of people on the streets. Things are very unstable. People get sick of it, so they look to sort of one person as sort of a savior who's going to establish order. Okay. And this guy, he starts off good. He chops off a lot of heads. People love it. Okay. So there's a purge. And then over time, though, he becomes, or he or she, I mean, it could be a she, the tyrant becomes, really bad, because they have absolute power, and power corrupts. And they start doing horrible tyrannical things. And then at that point, the people have like sort of the true Platonic revolution, where they get together in some kind of convention, and they write a new constitution, and they set up a republic, kind of like what happened in France after the French Revolution. There was a lot of guillotine action before the French established their first republic. And it's a government of law and representative bodies, and but are we going to see that in our lifetime? I mean, I don't know. I mean, we're still at the end of the oligarchy stage, so there's a lot of shit that has to play out. That's my view, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean,
you do predictions, but sometimes they're fun, right?
It makes a lot of sense, and it tracks historically too. The example, or the comparison between the modern day U.S. and the Roman Empire. Even if you look at the U.S. as almost an extension of the Roman Empire, like the Roman Empire itself never really died. It just moved the seat of power around the West over several hundred years and wound up right in DC. If you look at it through that lens, yeah, we're right about the Caligula stage of the Roman Empire, and Trump is, just certainly much older than Caligula, but the way that he feels in terms of loyalty as the penultimate form of respect to him and his administration. Like, I really feel like if he gets another 4 years, he would name a horse a general, I'm not kidding. Like, and if it wasn't him, it would have been Hillary Clinton.
come on, the Space Force is a total Caligula move. I mean,
Hey, look, man, there are space Mexicans and space ISIS out there, and if we don't build that space wall, we're gonna be space fucked. We are. That's all there is to it.
yeah.
No, Space Force is one of those things that, like, I've heard so many different excuses for why it exists, and most of them fall into the conspiratorial realm. But it's sad. I mean, to me, it is the ability to surveil and attack and maintain that asymmetrical balance in warfare, or that asymmetrical, uh, I guess, dichotomy in warfare, more than anything else. Although there are a number of running jokes to where, like, well, we had to get Space Force so that we could, actually get people to Russia's space station and follow what they're doing up there.
Yeah. Wow. A lot there that you just put out there.
That's the nature of the show. I just throw everything on the table, and then you can pick from it like a fucking buffet.
I like it. Okay. First thing, Roman Empire. I'm glad you brought that up because there's a really, really good book that I think people should read by a guy named Carroll Quigley, who was like one of Bill Clinton's favorite professors at Georgetown. And he wrote 2 books. I think one of them is called like Hope and Tragedy or something. The other one is this huge thing on the path of civilizations. But he was the guy that really first looked at the course of human history through broad civilizational groups. And it's something that's, I think, become even more popular today. But he was really the pioneer, and he really believed that, and he was writing in the 60s, but that Western civilization had a really actually very historic, and as far as civilizations are concerned, quite unusual long run as being the world's dominant civilization. But it's like all civilizations, it has to come to an end eventually, because kind of like the Plato thing in the Republic, there are these natural cycles that civilizations go through. And one of the things that Carroll Quigley talked a lot about was the concept of a universal empire. At some point, if a civilization becomes ascendant, when a civilization becomes ascendant, it one sort of society within the civilization becomes sort of this universal empire that controls the whole thing. And this is sort of the apex of the civilization's development before it falls apart, because there's an inevitable invasion, because inevitably the civilization grows too large and occupies too much territory, and it gets invaded and attacked by outsider groups, and then the whole thing falls apart and something else emerges. What's unusual about Western civilization is that it's actually gone through 4 universal empire stages, according to Quigley, and usually civilizations only go through 1. And he did like an exhaustive look at all civilizations throughout history, going back very obscure ones that you've probably never heard of, it's a very, very like, he was originally a chemist, so he applied a very rigorous scientific method to this. It's not just sort of rhetoric, but he identified the Western civilization as the only one that's gone through multiple universal empire states. So the first one being, well, actually, he doesn't consider Roman the Roman Empire to be part of Western civilization. He calls that classical civilization.
Okay.
And it includes the Greeks as well as the Romans in sort of one thing. And then after the Roman Empire, Western civilization is born from the Roman Empire's ashes. Starts the first universal empire is Britain. The second one is France. The third one is Germany. And then the fourth one is the United States. So he finds it very unusual that each of those universal empires were able to fall but not take Western civilization with it. But his prediction was that the U.S. would be the last. And if you think about it, I mean, there really is no one in Western civilization right now who would have sort of a title to come up. I mean, unless something dramatic happens, but who would have kind of a pathway to come up and claim the mantle of Western civilization. And so what's going to happen is I think we're going to see this cycle that Quigley predicts, and Western civilization as a whole is going to crash to the ground. And something else is going to come up. And, Chinese civilization obviously is very ascendant. Russian civilization, which is would call Orthodox or Byzantine civilization. Actually, no, Russian. He calls it Russian civilization. Some people call it Byzantine civilization, whatever. But that's also, up there. I mean, there are other civilizations that are making a play too. But that's sort of one way to look at the global context. Just wanted to, respond to that. And then you said something else. The second part of your
rambling diatribe.
Rambling diatribe hit on Space Force.
Yeah.
Space Force. Okay. So I think Space Force, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. I thought it was interesting that, they did the Elon Musk SpaceX launch yesterday on the same day we had like the most rioting in this country's history taking place on the same day. It's interesting if you look at foreign coverage of what happened yesterday in the U.S. My wife was reading the South Korean newspaper, one of them, and it's really interesting. They headline the fact that Elon Musk, launch a rocket, and then sort of in the corner, it's like, Donald Trump says that no more rioting will be tolerated or something, or looting will be tolerated. So, that I think has to do with something that, some interesting stuff that's going on in South Korea right now. But I think as a propaganda tool, it's apparent to me that it's being used to sort of deflect and distract as needed. I don't know how much meat is there in the Space Force, because I just don't know how to evaluate our space program ever since I've looked at the Apollo missions and decided that some really fucked up shit happened back then, and we're not getting the full truth about, whether we actually landed on the moon in the 60s. But,
No, and that's perfectly valid. Who is it? It's Eddie Bravo. Eddie Bravo, friend of Sam Tripoli and Alex Jones and Joe Rogan. He says NASA stands for never a straight answer. This goes all the way back to the Nazi draft, to Operation Paperclip and Werner von Braun and fucking. If you're familiar at all with Tom Lehrer, who
I know Tom. My wife's favorite musician of all time is Tom Lehrer.
Hell yeah. I missed him by like a year before, because he wound up teaching musical history at UCSC, University of California, Santa Cruz here. And I didn't either. But he had passed away like by the time I realized that, oh my God, he's right down the fucking road for me.
He was pretty old, right? I mean,
yeah, he was up there.
Yeah.
I want to say that he was born like the end of the 20s, early 30s.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, he
was not a spring chicken, but the very last line of the song that he does, called Werner von Braun, where he's speaking as Werner, is "Und I'm learning Chinese," says Werner von Braun.
Right.
And there's so many just nuggets in that song. Don't say that he's hypocritical. Say rather that he's apolitical. But I mean, in terms of China becoming ascendant, there's a series of kids books or young adult books called or that's based off of one novel called Ender's Game, um where they have exceptionally bright children recruited into their Space Force program to fight these, fight an alien invasion, fight off an alien invasion. And it's um the complete like breakdown of Earth's civilization is put on hold so that they can recruit and train all these children to fight, a larger existential threat. And then once that threat is defeated, um, the U.S. is basically reduced to a grumbling but powerless force, and the civilizations that become ascendant as a result of it are Russia, China, and a united almost Muslim caliphate.
Mm-hmm.
um and I mean, this was written, I want to say, early 80s, no later than the early 90s, the entire series.
Wow.
But the way that it's put together, and they describe the how the ascendancy of Russia and China and Muslim nations came about is almost prescient.
Yeah.
uh and then here we are in this moment where I agree with you that this is kind of the early rumblings of the downfall of Western civilization. Though if you listen to Chomsky, he says that the US began its decline immediately after World War II, and it's just been a long stretch of decline where we're a mad spoiled prince kicking and screaming, but without much of a country that will stand in that prince's defense.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there may be something to that. I think, again, I get back to Carol Quigley and say that it's very unusual for a civilization to go through multiple iterations of a universal empire. So, in order to adopt that mantle in the wake of Nazi Germany, I think the U.S. really had to pull a fast one very quickly on the world. And what we did was we ended up absorbing all of Nazi Germany's scientists, forming the CIA out of really, I think, Nazi principles of psychological control and extraordinary propaganda through the mass media. So we kind of we kind of had to adopt the German form or the Nazi form and perfect it on our own, while telling the world that we were, this benign country of freedom and liberty and justice for all. And we made some really great propaganda. So certainly, as far as the Hollywood era is concerned, I mean, you have some of the greatest propaganda of all time, and extraordinary ability to penetrate the world with it and fool the world into thinking we were the good guys, when they had just literally defeated, the ultimate bad guys, who were in some ways, in many ways, I mean, according to Quigley, the apex of Western civilization, Nazi Germany at that time. That's what they were claiming the mantle of, and they were trying to elevate. They even went back to the Greeks and the Romans very literally to try to elevate their society as sort of the culmination of Western, aesthetics, thought, technology, you name it. And we sort of took it from them, did it ourselves. So yeah, I would say we're, in that sense, we're very much a morally bankrupt from the beginning society since the beginning of World War II, which it's sad.
I'm sorry.
But at the same time, I mean, we genocided the Native Americans, way before we were, a global power. So it's kind of, I would say it's kind of in America's blood to be, out in the Wild West, guns a-blazing. So, I mean, if you don't kind of live here and understand that, I don't think you've absorbed American culture, um, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it can be deployed in bad ways, but this sort of boldness and bravado is kind of what makes Americans Americans. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh no, you're absolutely right. It is all encompassing swagger and the confidence that only the spoiled really ever develop. And as far as a culture, I feel like at least white America is one of the most spoiled cultures on the planet. Like, now that doesn't mean that there aren't impoverished white people, but I think if you look at it on an international level, the sheer supremacy that Americans walk around with, especially if you run into fellow countrymen overseas, there is no one more simultaneously ignorant and confident than an American tourist.
Yeah.
And that's taught, or it's at least ingrained in our collective American mythology, the idea that we're always on the right side of history, that we only enter the fray to save nations who are struggling from an oppressor, that kind of bullshit.
Right.
That it permeates our media landscape, it permeates our art and entertainment, and it just kind of forms the backbone of who we are culturally.
Right.
But if you look at what we actually do, it's a very different reality than what we're being presented. And it comes to, there's almost like we're going through an existential crisis over the last several years. And I think that the revelations that WikiLeaks revealed throughout the decade, the 2010s through 2020, I think those revelations helped spark that sort of existential crisis.
Right.
And now we've got to decide who we want to be going forward. And when you see something like a police station in flames, or cop cars on fire, you see that. And then I just saw a video this morning of a Genesee County sheriff taking his helmet off and putting his baton on the ground and going to walk and chant with protesters.
This was in Flint, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when that happens, when the vanguard of the oligarchy puts down their weapons and joins the peasantry, that's when you get a massive shift in well, I guess that's when you get your transition from oligarchy to demos, mob rule democracy.
Yes, that's exactly what you're going to see. You're going to see more and more of that. You're going to see the ability for popular leaders to suddenly arise out of nowhere, like the sheriff in Flint. Could easily be someone that is elevated into a position of authority and leadership precisely because he laid down his arms and joined the protesters. And the people are desperate for anybody outside of the established oligarchy to latch onto and lead them. The problem is that we're in a state of, it's mob rule, and we're a huge country, so it's going to vary from region to region. The possibility for civil war, secession, I think is going to be there and is going to happen. In terms of sort of the existential crisis, well, yeah, everybody's going through an existential crisis right now because, even if you're not like thinking things through and going back to Plato or whoever, you're watching your neighborhood collapse. You may not be on speaking terms with people in your family because the politics has gotten so hot. You're out of a job. You can't open up your business because of restrictions. So yeah, those are going to cause you to rethink your life in big ways, if not just for the basic question of what do I need to do to survive? What do I need to do to feed my family? And that's going to create all kinds of, I mean, people are going to have all types of different answers for that. And, I don't know that we're going to know how it shakes out. What I would say, though, is that because we're not going to be the dominant civilization anymore, there's going to be a lot of influence that comes from the dominant civilizations, which I think it is going to be China, because I think China's been methodically working on this problem for a long time. They've been making huge colonial inroads all over the world, especially in Africa, Latin America. They're, the other country that's really as globally present everywhere as much as we were. And it's only natural for them to kind of take the mantle. And they've just been going up, 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 up. Their trajectory has been one very precipitous incline. Not very long ago, they were sitting in extraordinary poverty, and their society was extremely pre-modern and feudal and full of famines and all kinds of stuff. So they're sort of in the position. So I think you're going to see a lot of inclination, because China is going to be dominant, and so it probably pays to start to learn how the Chinese think and how they see the world, because I think whether you like it or not, those things are going to creep into our society and change our society and sort of push people in a different direction. I mean, that's the nature of colonial domination. That's the nature of civilizational domination. We've been doing that to other countries for decades. Now it's kind of our turn, and it can go good or it can go bad.
And the idea that we started out as a colony and in 250 years or so are headed the same direction is going to be really, really difficult for most Americans to even wrap their heads around, because they only know the America of revolution.
Yeah.
And they don't, there's no real, or not none, but there's very little recorded history of the US as a colonial state before the American Revolution. And I've heard a handful of people say this, but if you look at where we are politically, both the Republicans and the Democrats would have been British Empire loyalists. Mm-hmm. In the actual revolutionary Americans would fall across the more libertarian to left-leaning anarchist spectrum. That there's that political compass that has the XY axis, and up on the top is authoritarianism, and up on the bottom is libertarianism. And look, I mean, the way that I personally feel is that we can't even begin to have political conversations or advocate policy one way or another unless we have access to free-flowing, uncorrupted, unspun information. And with the way that our media works right now, it's all spun and corrupted information. We've talked about this a number of times. But we still have outlets like WikiLeaks that publish. We still have a resurgent collective of hacktivists and information activists in Anonymous that are really I spoke about war being fought in the digital space earlier, and those guys are quite literally the front lines of fighting that war in the digital space. Unless we can figure out how to become a post-partisan civilization, I'm pretty sure we're well fucked and far from home.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, the first part of what you said, I mean, that really gets back to what you were saying earlier on, the existential crisis that we're going to go through, because our own history as a nation has been so propagandized, and we don't have a good sense as a people for what Americans were like before they were, a global superpower country that was known the world over and basically ran the show. And even in our founding moment, I mean, the American Revolution was, a worldwide event that people, our founding fathers were celebrities in their own time. I mean, we had a very high profile at the moment of revolution. So it's really, almost our entire history is taken up. I mean, I think you have to go back to probably the first people that, came to the New World and were successful in establishing communities, and that would be the Puritans, to really get at probably what is the core American quality. And it's interesting. They were a pretty interesting lot. I mean, on the one hand, they sort of weren't into material possessions. They were extremely God fearing. They didn't seem like a people that would end up like dominating the world. They really were getting away from England because they were being religiously persecuted and they wanted to practice their religion. And at the same time, I mean, they were they were unusually intense, I would say, and they had. They actually were very, very litigious with each other. This is something that people don't realize, but they sued the fuck out of each other all the time. I mean, the early colonial records are like filled with like Puritans like suing each other in Massachusetts over, land, property lines and stuff, like that sort of stuff. So they were kind of had this antagonistic attitude. They believed that God's will was inscrutable, and they sort of became very hardworking because they felt that even if they couldn't know God's will, at least they could work hard and accumulate property, and that would be a sign that God was favoring them. So psychologically, I think they were disposed to very, very hard work, and that quality has also served the U.S. very well because it's a country that, is willing, always was willing. I mean, we had an extremely high work ethic. I mean, I think, compared to other countries, right from the very beginning. So, those are the things I think we're going to have to rely on, like those positive traits of maybe introspection, hard work, not being sort of just like falling into a eternal depression because you're no longer on top, but being like, okay, well, if this is my parcel, my meager little parcel that I have in this, frozen tundra in, far away from home, that's what I'll work on, and I'll work to like, so that could serve us well. I think if we sort of rediscover that, maybe things won't feel so bad, so that's maybe a good thing. The second part of what you were saying, gosh, what was it? What were you talking about?
I experience every show in a blackout. I really do. If you were to ask me like 15 minutes from now what I talked about, I have no fucking idea. Roll tape, let me try and cycle back here. I think we were talking about the ascendancy of China, and but no, I'm pretty sure that we covered that. Yeah, man. You're asking the wrong fucking guy. I don't. It's possible that Sleepy Josh is aware, but I think he's been running the chat on the D Live right now. He says, "Yup."
You tend to speak in like two parts. Usually, there's one long part, and then there's a second part, which doesn't necessarily flow straight out of the first part, but is still has some relation to it.
Yeah, that's the stand-up comic in me in my early 20s, where I'll set up the joke and then kind of walk away from it and then come back to it for one or two sentences. Clearly that career option did not pan out for me. Not too many people were screaming for, a borderline psychedelic comedian who was also a white kid from Indiana there in the mid 90s. Those fell out of the demo. There was something though that I did want to talk to you about, and that is the idea that out of this sort of, I don't know, reconnection with a not necessarily puritanical mindset, but a dedication to community building for the sake of if you don't have a community to kind of help you through what is going to obviously be a very transitional period in America that we are inarguably going through at this very moment. Does a culture that is so, I guess, selfish, and rooted in this sort of instant gratification, while at the same time operating on almost the cancel culture ethos or aspect, do we really have a chance to formulate a sense of community out of this, or are we just setting ourselves up to be conquered en masse?
Wow.
By the way, this is why John McAfee hates me, because I ask questions like this.
Is he still on a boat somewhere?
He is still on a fucking boat, bro. I interviewed him at the beginning of the month, on Cinco de Mayo. He was my guest, right. And the first thing that he did, I know he tries to fuck with the interviewer, like that's one of his things. He enjoys it. He gets on the call and he's like, all right, so let's just settle this real quick. I don't know if I ate those children or not. I was drunk, and like, and that's
what happens when you're out to sea for that long,
but I asked him a handful of questions, and like he completely broke character, and he was like, I thought you were a nice man.
Wow, John McAfee. I mean, he's one of those, interesting people that's going to be, sailing the seas during these tumultuous times, and who knows what might happen. I mean, there may be a band of outlaws that joins him, and I mean, it's probably a good time to be an outlaw. Generally, democracy in the Platonic sense is, because the law is so weak. You can kind of just do your thing, get your own gang together, and go looting and marauding. So, I'd say he's things worked out for him chronologically, given things weren't, they weren't looking so hot in Belize for a while.
No, they weren't. They weren't at all. But yeah, he's a fucking multi-billionaire yacht cruising pirate.
Well, the funny thing is everybody remembers McAfee, the little antivirus thing that was on your computer. Generally, if you had, I just remember, that thing would come. I think my dad bought it for me, one time when I was like 12. He's like, we're gonna keep the PC safe from viruses, son. This is antivirus software. The leading, the McAfee. Look, you're like, oh, cool. It's like killing viruses, and
he put out a video on how to uninstall McAfee antivirus software.
Yeah.
And it's him in like a smoking jacket, and he's surrounded by, half naked fucking 22-year-olds, and he's fucking around at the computer, and you hear him like cuss at it. And then he jumps up from his chair, pulls a gun out of the smoking jacket, and shoots the computer. And he's like, all right, that's how you do it.
Unreal.
Yeah. It's unreal to me that I had that guy on my fucking show,
Yeah,
but it was,
that's and such a storied life he's living. But back to your question though, because it was an interesting one. You said, do we have a chance of are we just is it inevitable that we're gonna just get fucked or and invaded and conquered? I mean, yeah. I mean, I think the unless something drastic changes, because I mean, ultimately it's all driven by the economics. Okay, I mean, the economics are not good for us right now. I mean, our primary source of economic sustenance is under assault from the entire world, that being the petrodollar. Um, we every other country hates the petrodollar and is looking to destroy it. So they're working hard to destabilize us and shut down our economy. Our response to this is to basically just print an unlimited amount of money, which is guaranteed to lead to hyperinflation, which is the death scourge of every society that's experienced it. So, I mean, these are some pretty big problems that, I mean, you'd have to have, I mean, some kind of messianic, angel of God or something come to earth and perform miracles to take us out of this. And I just don't see that on the horizon. I mean, maybe the Q people have some, have some whole grasp on this that I'm missing, but I've never been convinced by any of their arguments or proofs, as they like to call them.
Are you not trusting the plan, Jared Beck?
There are plans. I mean, the interesting thing is that there are plans. They're just never by white hats. I mean, that's what the Q people miss. I mean, I mean, all that shit about the Illuminati and the Jesuits and the fucking the Aquarian conspiracy. There's more truth to all of that than I would have ever believed. But when it comes to the Q postulate, which is that there's a team of white hats working behind the scenes to bring back an incredible awakening and incredible rectification of justice, it just falls on its face. And you would think that the Q people would actually see these riots that happened yesterday as a good thing, because I would think it would fit in with their notion of an awakening. But by and large, all the fucking Q people, and I see them all the time because I'm limited to Gab. I can't,
right,
be on any other forum. I mean, I have a bot on Twitter that sort of defends my reputation there. But
I love your bot, by the way, and this will eventually get into the earshot and eyesight of the Jared bot. So much love to the Jared bot. I think I told you I've had a couple of conversations in DMs with the Jared bot before.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the bot. I mean, the bot is actually way better at Twitter than I ever was. So it's actually worked out quite well. And I mean, I learn things from the bot constantly, and it's just the idea of having a bot is I think everybody should have the opportunity to experience it. It's really a good. The actual organic Jared Beck can only post on Gab. And Gab is fine. I mean, it's very much free speech, but there's a lot of people that are just knee jerk, racists on Gab, and there are a lot of people that are into the Q bullshit on Gab, and it's I mean, I think both of these lines of thought, I think, are filled with huge fallacies, and the Q fallacy is that they're postulating that something that completely goes against the grain of human history and human motivation as it's been experienced throughout the ages. That there are no white hats that inhabit a core, or secretly inhabit a core section of a corrupt government and reform it from inside. That's never happened. It's never happened. It never will happen. It would require human beings to be wired in a completely different way.
No, I agree with that 100%. And the religious overtones around Q, I think are what keeps the Q faithful, is that they've applied the same energy that they would in being an evangelical into the Q mythos. And this has a mirror, Hegelian dialectic. um you see the exact same thing in like the Bernie Sanders people or the centrist Democrats, where they're largely secular, but all of the energy that would go into being a person of faith is transferred onto a figure like Bernie Sanders or a figure like AOC or even Hillary Clinton to a degree. And it's a misappropriation of faith
Mm-hmm.
that because there aren't everyday miracles being performed in front of them, they've got to apply that energy somewhere, and that somewhere has gone into political ideology
Right.
or has gone into a mysterious account on 8chan.
Yeah, Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses. So when you want to give the masses an opiate, you give them religion because it encourages them to be passive and not take action in the face of reality and subscribe instead to some passive narrative in which they'll be saved. Now, uh, it's interesting because we're talking about the Puritans. I mean, the Puritans were very, very religious, but they also had qualities that made them very active and hardworking and productive in society. So it's not that like religion always leads you to sit back and just sit on your ass and wait for the white hats to do their thing. But certain religious narratives do that, and I think the Bernie Sanders as like playing 6D chess or whatever is a good example of that. Um, and I think they are propagated largely by state. I think both of these myths have been propagated by or they're tied directly or indirectly to state-sponsored propaganda that wants people to sit back and accept the illusion of leadership that's in front of them, whether that's Donald Trump if you're on the right, or a Bernie Sanders like figure if you're on the left. But I really do believe, and I'm just getting back to what we were saying earlier, I really believe that we're at the end of this type of oligarchic rule, and meaning that the same oligarchy that's been promulgating these myths and narratives for a long time now, I think they really are coming to an end. You're starting to see that. I thought the attack on CNN was very symbolic. So whoever is doing the agent provocateuring behind these riots that are going on is doing so in a very they're trying to make symbolic points with what they're doing, and attacking CNN headquarters definitely that's something that was planned and established long in advance, I believe, when this plan was put into place by whoever is trying to destabilize the current oligarchy. And they're going right for the propagandists, the central propagandists. It's interesting that that was the one media outlet to get visibly attacked by the protesters, right? Um,
Yeah.
so they're going to the belly of the beast, um, and there's going to be a period of instability that Plato would call democracy once that oligarchy falls, and it's going to be really fucking weird here because people are going to not have those myths to fall back on because they're not, the oligarchs aren't going to be in a position where they're able to ram them down everyone's throat in the same way. It's going to be something else.
Yeah.
What it is, I don't know because I'm not one of the controllers. I wish I were, but I'm just trying to read events from the ground floor. No, I really don't wish I were a controller.
Right. Jesus Christ. That would be a fucking headache.
Oh, not only is that a headache, but like, I mean, you imagine, like, how do you get any sleep? I mean, you have to like monitor events like constantly, right? I mean, how the fuck can you possibly, like, you go to bed for like a few hours, and like, things get out of whack, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And because of the way that information travels now, there really is no downtime for anyone in a position of real or perceived power.
Yeah.
Like there's no downtime. Um
Right. Right.
it seems like what is going on with these demonstrations, and then we'll wrap up. We've been going for a little bit over an hour straight now, and I'm stoked on it. But it seems like the exact same playbook of destabilization that the U.S. employs in Latin American countries, African countries, Middle Eastern countries, is being borne out in real time domestically now. And short of Richard Branson holding a benefit concert that is a front to smuggle arms in, like we're seeing the exact same elements at play. So if it is an internal attack, then it's elements within our own government who want to use this opportunity to completely dominate the regular working class Americans. And if it's outside influences that are doing it,
Mm-hmm.
then why the fuck isn't our own government actively rooting out and trying to expose these agent provocateurs?
Okay. Okay. This is like, these are the profound questions that you really have to, I mean, you have to sort of puzzle through now, because I think it's part of, it's at the root of the general anxiety that's going on, which is like things, again, people are gonna instinctually know that things are off. I mean, normally, I don't care. I know there's a lot of people out there. They have these sort of knee jerk, very superficial reaction to events. So they read looting, they immediately think of like a bunch of black people, ripping shit up in an urban neighborhood. But if you actually spent time looking at what these riots were and who's involved in them, it's a pretty diverse crowd of people, right? I mean, and this is not like the LA riots, in terms of being confined to a certain um, segment of the population, and you can kind of confine it. I mean, and my wife lived through the LA riots. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember being in like high school during that, and my wife was in LA. This is at a sort of an order of magnitude greater, um, because it's not just black people out there angry about a black guy getting publicly executed by the cops, but it's also um, white people out there. Okay, it's also Hispanic people out there. I mean, fucking Salt Lake City, man. I mean, fucking destroying cop cars. Okay, I mean, you've got very very angry people just across the board, and how could they not be angry? I mean, you've basically prevented them from leaving their houses for the past few months. Okay, um, in some of these cold places. I mean, does it get cold where you are in Santa Cruz? I mean, do you guys have
The last I mean, so I went back to work this week
mm,
because they had officially reopened Santa Cruz for construction, and I do new builds and remodels for my survival money.
yeah.
And on Memorial Day it was like 102 degrees here,
Whoa.
which is pretty fucking hot for a community this close to the ocean.
Wow.
Um, And
Isaac,
by
there in the sun.
yesterday, by Friday, it was down to 65. It was 45 at night. I almost made a fucking fire last night because I'm in my 40s now and I get fucking, I'm starting to feel the weather, like straight up. I am. I've got enough metal in my body from injuries to where I know when it's going to rain now.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and it has been, yeah, in terms of, I mean, we've had schizophrenic weather to serious degree
Okay.
throughout the week.
Okay. But I mean, a lot of these people in Minnesota, like I've been to Minnesota a few times in the winter. You don't go outside in fucking.
Fuck no, you get Risk or Axis and Allies and a case of whiskey, and you fucking stay. You stay put.
I grew up in upstate New York. I mean, winters were pretty harsh up there. Not even close to what they have in Minnesota, though. I mean, it's like a whole other level of like Arctic chill, and so they went through that. I assume they had like their winter when it was like you fucking couldn't go outside, and then just as like spring's hitting, they get hit with the fucking coronavirus, and they can't go out fucking side. Plus, they can't like make money. Okay, oh, doesn't that seem to anybody with like half a brain that you're just like building up the anxiety and the cabin fever to an intolerable point? I mean, this is like painfully obvious, right? And then what do? You take like this, like you get this footage of a black guy like on the ground, and he's being like executed in public, okay, by this cop who's got his hand in his pocket the whole
Yeah,
time. He's like just kind of like staring with this MK Ultra, like, peace in the calm of the storm stare that I think like Sirhan had after he was arrested for allegedly shooting RFK. You've
yeah.
got other cops that are like doing nothing. There's obviously like a crowd of onlookers taunting them, recording it, telling them not to do it. But they seem like unusually unconcerned about the fact that like their partner is like murdering a restrained man like in front of everyone. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and then you find out that this guy who was murdered and the cop who did the murdering like worked at the same nightclub in Minneapolis. Okay, and I don't know, but I smell the kind of staged event that the deep state is very, very good at staging and has done for a long time. And here's another thing. I mean, people get killed by the cops all the time in this country. Okay, it's a pretty common event. Um, how many times does it lead to a riot? Pretty rarely. Okay, I
Yeah,
mean, Ferguson. But like a lot of times, it happens and there's some anger and maybe like a local sort of protest, but it doesn't. So that to me indicates that, yeah, there's some definite lighter fluid being poured on this tinderbox, and there are agent provocateurs out there, and it's very easy for them to take a big crowd of people that's already been whipped up into going into a protest because of this incredibly horrific footage that's being flashed in front of them, and get them to like do some looting and vandalism and what have you. So I think there's been a lot of it's a heavily planned, scripted event, which to me indicates that it is. You posit that there are two avenues, right? One, it could be the state trying to um, get us to another level of control and submission, I guess. The other is that it's outside forces that are looking to sort of take the U.S. down a notch, or many notches.
yeah,
Uh, I just the way it is so scripted, and it involves attacks against property, including wealthy brands like Nordstrom's, and what was happening in LA. And just understanding the global posturing around the petrodollar, the fact that Russia basically like tried to kill off our entire oil industry by flooding the market with oil, and sent the price of oil to the floor. I mean, it just seems to me that those countries which are very powerful and have infiltrated the U.S. to such a high extent are behind it. You know what I'm saying? And it's not some grand plan that involves the U.S. concern. I'm sure there are people in the U.S., many people in the U.S. that are working with them because these are sort of excluded oligarchs. But like people who are sort of have made their bread and butter off of the success of the U.S. I can't see how, for example, like a Warren Buffett would be behind something like this, or a Koch brothers. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
In other words,
Yeah.
the sort of traditional oligarchy. I can't see how they would be like, yeah, let's do race riots. That's going to be great for the American economy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, generally, those people are scared by race riots. That's the kind of tinder you play with it in the U.S. And the next thing you're talking about is a civil war. Okay, I mean, because that's the issue that cleaves the American people more than anything else is race. So I don't think it would be a good idea if patriotic. I mean, I don't mean patriotic, but sort of people that had American interests primarily in mind. I don't see why they would play with that at this point. It just seems much more like people that are like, if the U.S. falls into a bubbling mass of hellish hellfire, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that assessment. I do. It would be incredibly out of character for the segment of the U.S. government, the entrenched unelected state or deep state or whatever you want to call it, to use the same destabilization tactics that they do abroad on their own citizens, only because there's so fucking many of us.
Mm-hmm.
If we were a smaller country, yeah, I feel like that would be easier to control. But when you've got 335 million people,
right,
and the amount of just sheer territory,
couldn't even deploy our tactics successfully in Iraq or Afghanistan. Okay, which, I mean, I'm not saying those are uncomplex societies, but they're much smaller and they're much easier to sort of figure out like who the main players are and the cultural norms. All right. I mean, the U.S. is infinitely more complex. Okay. And, if you're going to do like an operation of this size on it, it can only be an operation to create mass confusion, dysfunction, and what we're in for. It's not going to be something that results in a perfectly efficient totalitarian state in which I mean, I think there may have been some movement to that that we saw in the internet era as the deep state was formulating Facebook and Twitter and so forth in an effort to control us. I think, though, that it didn't. I think by what you're seeing with the riots that happened yesterday is an indication that Hail Mary attempt to turn us all into useless masses of flesh connected to some ether. It still might be implemented, and it probably will be implemented at some point, but it's not going to be implemented by the American interests. It's going to be implemented by the Chinese interests. That's what I'm saying.
That's fucking fascinating. I think we're gonna wrap here. I actually have to get down to Santa Cruz by 1:00. They're going to be doing a march and demonstration that I would like to be able to cover. And it takes about 40 minutes to get there and fucking park and all that dumb shit. But Jared, I want to thank you very, very much for hanging in there through the technological issues and for just another hell of a conversation. I really do. I enjoy when you're on the show. Next time, bring Elizabeth on so we can we can cut up even more.
Yeah, she's at the office today, so you know.
All right, and then please tell people if you have anything that you're trying to push or anything that people need to be aware of. Let the folks know about that.
Yeah, so next week we may hear about what happens with the Supreme Court and the DNC fraud lawsuit. So
Fuck
stay
yeah.
tuned for that. It was distributed at their May 28th conference, and typically the Supreme Court will issue an order indicating what it is going to do with respect to each of the petitions it had at its conference, and usually there's probably like 100 different petitions on there. So the chances are very, very low. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up that because it's just an extremely small percentage of cases are taken by the Supreme Court. But look out. We'll obviously be reporting what the result of that is.
Well, kick ass. That's going to do it for this episode of Slow News Day. Yeah, that's going to be about it. I'm not sure what's going on with the YouTube channel right now. So if you're watching, please make sure that you're subscribed to the D Live or the Rockfin. And tell your friends, because it might get impossibly weirder. In fact, it's definitely going to get impossibly weirder than it currently is. So till next time, y'all, I love the shit out of you, and good luck to us all.